In another life, Salote Maphileopilulevu would have been the most important person in her brother's family, but she didn't have a brother. In another life, Salote Maphileopilulevu would have been killed when she was 9 years old, but her father chose not to do that. As it happened, Salote Maphileopilulevu wasn't killed when she was 9. She really didn't have a brother. And so at the age of 18, she became Queen Salote Tupou III of Tonga. And I guess in doing so, she also ended up being the most important person in her family. By birthright, perhaps. By choices, for sure. Tonga's society is built on traditions. And the traditions we choose to accept upon ourselves shape and change our lives. Today we're going to explore the traditions that guide society in Polynesia's only surviving monarchy. The traditions that can put you up on a pedestal, and those that can end it all. In doing so, we'll uncover the unique path that Tonga has elected to take for itself, different in so many ways, for so long, from its neighbouring island states of the South Pacific. We'll look ahead at our ports of call, and we'll come to realise how important our traditions are, and why it's critical to choose them wisely. Let's start a long, long time ago. I can still remember, with a whistle-stop journey from the foundations of Tongan civilization to today. Today, Tonga is an archipelago of over 170 islands, of which 36 are lived on by a total of 106,000 people. Most of the population lives on the island of Tongatapu, which is where the capital, Nuku'alofa, is based. Although a large contingent of Tonga's population actually lives overseas, in New Zealand, Australia, America and beyond, sending money back home with a view to retiring back in their homeland in later life. Foreigners can't buy land in Tonga, and so 97% of the population identifies as ethnically Tongan, one of the most ethnically homogeneous populations in the region, if not the world. And Tonga has a long history as an influential power in the Pacific, the original powerhouse of the South Pacific. The first king of Tonga assumed his throne in about 1000 BCE, and over the years, Tongan kings outgrew their homeland and set their sights on bigger prizes. They were ambitious. They saw themselves as more than just measly kings. No, they were born to be emperors. And so out set the legendary Tongans, the greatest navigators of the Pacific, in their conquest to colonize their great ocean, to create an ocean-wide conglomerate of islands that would have made 19th century British aristocrats drool with envy. And these early Tongan imperialists did an impressive job of it. Centered in their capital of Mua on the island of Tongatapu, Tongan navigators spread out across the ocean like a Venetian fan, settling on every island their paths crossed. The vision that Tu'i Tonga Ahu'eitu set into motion back in 950, as the Samoan attempted empire dwindled, grew into an empire that lasted for something in the region of 450 years. As with the British Empire that would later colonize half the world, the Tongan Empire of the Middle Ages secured and ensured its long-lasting control over its colonies by way of a powerful and respected navy. This navy island-hopped as far north as Matautu, the capital of modern-day Wallis and Futuna, as far west as Viti Levu in Fiji, and to the east, Tongans reached as far as Nui. Based on archaeological evidence of tools discovered from this era, experts estimate that at its peak, the Tongan Empire could have reached 500,000 square kilometres, or 193,051 square miles in size. Of the 195 internationally recognised countries on the world map today, that's the equivalent of Tonga ruling the 56 smallest countries, almost 1/3 of the countries on the planet, or, combined, a landmass the size of Spain. And that's without the vast ocean that spreads between the islands that were also considered imperial waters. Tonga was a dominant force in this region. And perhaps it was for this reason that Europeans never colonized the islands of Tonga. Perhaps a cautious reverence for their proven colonial capabilities encouraged the Dutch, French, and British to give the Tongans a slightly wider berth than other Pacific islands. But that's not to say that the Europeans didn't make visits to the islands of Tonga. They did. Back in 1616, William Schouten and Jacob Lemaire became the first Europeans to record a visit to the islands. They were followed 27 years later by the much better known Dutchman Abel Tasman, who traded with the locals on the island of Tongatapu. And exactly 130 years later, Captain James Cook made land in Tongatapu and was so taken by the friendliness of the islanders' greetings that he gave the islands the moniker the Friendly Islands, a nickname that stuck for several centuries in the West. Well, the West didn't colonize Tonga militarily, but perhaps they colonized the islands in a different way. In the 1820s, the first Christian missionaries arrived in Tonga from Britain. These missionaries would go on to have a large influence on the country, which is, to this day, one of the most religiously observant nations on earth. And no part of Tongan society is more indebted to 19th century missionaries than the monarchy. Paradoxically, the monarchy, whose power and authority is derived from divine right, had the most to lose from the arrival of British missionaries. In traditional Tongan society, the monarch, the Tu'i Tonga, was descended directly from the gods. In the oral tradition, Tu'i Tonga Aho Eitu, the Tu'i Tonga who started expanding the Tongan Empire in 950, was the son of the god E Itumatupua. His mother was a mortal woman. He became the king on earth. Son of a god with a human mother. His descendants continued the kingship. Well, now, in come a new group of people, Anglicans from Britain, with their own son of God with a human mother. And it wasn't Aho Eitu. Oh, and to make things trickier, these visiting Anglicans didn't believe that their God had any brothers or sisters, or a pantheon of deities like in Rome or ancient Greece, or 19th century Tonga. To convert Tonga to Christianity, with its one God who had one son with one human mother, would be to remove 1,000 years of Tongan divine right. But kings and emperors are surprisingly adept at fitting in alternative ideas to the chains that shackle them to their thrones. And so in 1831, one of the ruling chiefs of Tonga, Tu'i Ha'apei Ta'ufa'ahui, was baptized by missionaries and sought to lead the country united into a new era. An era that wouldn't be governed by the West, but has undoubtedly been created in the image of it. The Tu'i Tonga title was dissolved in favour of the westernized title King of Tonga. After 39 Tu'i Tongas, the numbering of the monarchs started again from 1. And with newly chosen traditions in place, the kingdom continued. So let's take a look at the modern-day kingdom of Tonga. When he was baptized, Tu'i Tonga Ta'ufa'ahau took for himself a new name, George, after George III of Britain, a regal name, a name that quite clearly stated his intentions to continue as king. King George Tupu I did a lot to modernize his country. He freed the slaves, codified a constitution with a supporting written legal code, opened up the option of land ownership for his subjects, expanded freedom of the press, and curtailed some of the powers of tribal chiefs. King George Tupu I died at the age of 95 in 1893, succeeded by his great-grandson George Tupu II. And this Tongan king, the second one in a line of 41, if you will, made a series of decisions with big implications. First, maybe inspired by the kings of Europe, he had a secret premarital fling with an English commoner, which resulted in 2 illegitimate children. Well, his public affairs were as messy as his private life, and his reign was thrown into something of a quagmire. Even before he assumed the throne, this second king of Tonga had questionable aptitude for the role. In a letter dated 16th of February 1892, his great-grandfather, the reigning King George Tupu I, scolded his heir, telling him emphatically and with no ambiguity, "You have broken a clause of the Constitution that everyone has absolute right to his own possessions. I consider you to be a thief. You've been doing this for years through your ignorance and stupidity, and I've been silent because it was you. But you must know that I am very angry. I'm warning you that if this continues, we will have to prosecute you in order that you will pay for your actions." He was on shaky ground, something that his daughter and other more sympathetic commentators would later attribute to his lack of guidance. In particular, he didn't have a sister. Remember that, because sisters are important in Tonga. Most important. Anyway, King George Tupu II wasn't perhaps the ideal monarch, so he brought in the British, experts in patching over regal infidelities and whatnot, to secure his cushions on the seat of power. Tonga became a British protectorate, or perhaps it's fair to say the Tongan monarchy became a British protectorate, because the threat was a civil war rather than a foreign invasion. And King George Tupu II accepted his parliament's recommendation of a wife. A very clever match, for Lavinia Vengo was the last known descendant of the final Tu'i Tonga, tying the modern monarchy with the former dynasty that dated back 1,000 years. George had another daughter. This one was not a secret. She was called Salote, or Charlotte. But her mother died from tuberculosis when Salote was just 2 years old. For now, Salote was safe, but should her father, the king, remarry, then it was customary in Tongan society for the offspring of the previous marriage to be killed. Well, on 11th November 1909, King George Tupu II did exactly that. He remarried. This time to the 16-year-old daughter of the highest-ranking woman in Tonga. The chiefs were delighted. What a match! But the wedding bells rang a death knells for 9-year-old Salote. Except George Tupu II chose not to abide by that tradition. He protected his daughter by sending her to New Zealand to continue her education. In the meantime, the king continued having children with his new wife, in the hope of a male heir that never came. With his second queen, Tupu II had 2 further daughters, taking his tally of female offspring to 5. He did have sons within his career as well, but they were unofficial achievements, and therefore not considered contenders to the throne. When Tupu II died in April 1918, he was succeeded by the most famous and celebrated of all Tongan monarchs, Tupu III, Queen Salote Tupu III, the queen who was, because of the traditions her father chose to follow, or, just as true, because of the traditions her father chose to ignore. Now, Queen Salote is the last of the monarchs that we'll talk about in any detail, because they're currently on number 6 and we could be here all day. But it's interesting to note, before we talk about her personally, that she bears the number 3 after her name. She was the first Queen Salote of Tonga. In fact, she was the first Queen of Tonga at all. So why the 3rd? Well, that gives us an indication into the importance of family in Tongan society. She's the 3rd not for the Salote part, but the Tu'u part, the more important part in Tongan society. Remember this, we're going to come back to it in a bit. Queen Salote Tu'u III put Tonga on the modern map. She became queen at the age of 18, 3 months before giving birth to her heir, a son. I'll give you 3 guesses what she called him. George. Queen Salote led Tonga through the Second World War, declaring war on Germany in 1940 and on Japan a year later. And she put Tonga's resources at the disposal of the British in the war effort. And despite fostering a close relationship with Britain during her 48-year reign, it was also Queen Salote who set in motion the conclusion of Britain's protectorship of Tonga. Tonga could and would stand for itself. But the moment that perhaps stands out more than any other in Queen Salote's reign happened in Britain, in London, on the 2nd of June 1953. Queen Salote was in London attending the coronation of a 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth II. Well, as you can imagine, royals and dignitaries from around the world were in London for the big occasion. 8,251 selected guests filed along the pews of Westminster Abbey to see the young queen being crowned. 129 nations and territories were officially represented at the service. And one of those nations was Tonga, represented by their queen, Queen Salote. Now, it might not surprise you to hear that on this day of days in London, it rained. And so up went the hoods over the procession of carriages rolling their way through the city's streets. Queen Elizabeth II remained dry despite the rain, as did the passengers of every other carriage. Except for one. For Queen Salote refused a hood and chose to ride through London's damp streets exposed to heaven's tears of joy. Her carriage mate, Sultan Ibrahim IV of Kelantan, modern-day Malaysia, was less than impressed, but the crowds loved her. The people's queen. Where did this down-to-earth, weatherproof ruler come from? And why, when every other carriage accepted a hood for its regal riders, did Queen Salote say no? Well, that comes down to another Tongan tradition. In Tonga, custom dictates that you should not imitate the actions of a person that you are honouring. As Queen Elizabeth II accepted a hood, Queen Salote deemed it inappropriate to accept the same for herself as the queen that she was visiting to honour. In so many ways, Queen Salote of Tonga stood above the crowd. Literally, she towered over most crowds at 6'3", but where she really stood out was how well she fitted in. She was loved equally at home as she was overseas, and perhaps her abilities to be one with her people came down to her own life experiences. Motherless at 2, death-defying thanks to her father's love at 9, and an orphan at 18. When asked who was looking after her following the death of her father, her response was everyone and no one. Queen Salote, the teenager, defied the low expectations of her chiefs to become the most significant of all modern-era Tongan monarchs. And, perhaps thanks to her father's decision to exile her to New Zealand for her education, she led the charge in developing her people's prospects. She was a patron of the arts. She opened education to girls and provided scholarships to enable students to succeed. She established modern courts. She oversaw the establishment of a national savings bank. And if anybody thinks that this is an uneducated backwater of the Pacific, make absolutely no mistake. Thanks to the traditions and values prioritized by Queen Salote, Tonga claims to have one of the highest rates of PhDs per capita in the world. And with 99% of the Tongan population being literate by the age of 14, the country certainly has one of the highest literacy rates on the planet. For comparison, according to the Census Bureau, the literacy rate in the US is 86%. Queen Salote embodied traditional values of Tongan society from her elevated position and helped these traditions transition into the modern era. She sent gifts to widows and was known for her unwavering empathy for those who were suffering, probably drawn out of her own experiences of loss throughout her life. In many ways, the polar opposite of her father, this empathetic queen lived by her own dictum that you lay down obligations only in the grave. So let's take a look at some Tongan traditions before we round off with a peek ahead at Nuku'alofa and Neiafu. We've actually already captured a snapshot of some traditions here, some chosen to be followed by the people we've met thus far, some chosen to be ignored. We know that remarriage historically permitted the deaths of existing offspring. We know that Tongans don't mimic their hosts or those that they wish to show reverence and respect to. We know that family is important and that sisters are the most important. But we don't yet know why. So instead of just rattling off a list of Tongan customs and traditions, of which there are hundreds, let's zoom in on perhaps the most important of all, the structure of society and the importance of family within it. Perhaps the most distinctive quality of Tongan society that surprises visitors is that Tongan is a matriarchal society. That is to say, that women are considered more important than men here. And this isn't some post-1970s wave of Pacific Island feminism. This is a true Tongan tradition reaching back millennia. Women have always been honoured in Tonga with the highest rank. Men were instead honoured in material terms. A daughter, for example, would inherit the family's title and rank, the responsibility for the welfare of society. A son, on the other hand, would inherit the family's land, and therefore the responsibility to provide food for the family. Both forms of inheritance designed to further the individual's commitment to the family. Even in modern-day Tonga, collectivism is the guiding philosophy. And every family is led by a fahu. The title of fahu is no joke. This is a big commitment, translating to dignified leader and assuming the responsibilities as the most important person in the family unit. And interestingly, this distinction is given to the eldest sister in a father's family, the paternal aunt or one of her female descendants. Every family has a fahu, and depending on the individual family, one fahu might have a lot of people within her guidance and care. There is such respect for women here that brothers and sisters are typically brought up separately, and it would be considered inappropriate for a brother and sister to be in a room alone together. Some families even have separate bathrooms in their houses for the men and women. The significance of the fahu is that it's most apparent at major family events, such as weddings and funerals. At a wedding, the bride's mother traditionally weaves a mat for the groom's aunt, his fahu. And at a funeral, it's the fahu who is provided a seat as the primary mourner. Following the period of mourning, where no music or dancing is permitted, it is again the fahu who breaks the silence for the family by making noise on a traditional wooden drum. On the subject of mourning, a tradition that you ought to be aware of before we arrive, people only wear black here when in mourning. So unless you're mourning someone presently, it's appropriate not to wear black when visiting Tonga. So, to finish up, let's talk about our Tongan ports of call, Nuku'alofa and Neiafu. Nuku'alofa, the capital of Tonga. 20 years ago, tourism wasn't much of a thing in Tonga. But today, Nuku'alofa is a popular cruise port with a purpose-built pier. We'll likely be greeted by live music from the police band along their pier as we walk into town. And when we get to the city centre, check out the Talamahu market on Salote Road. This large market sells everything from fresh fruit and veg to beautifully carved wooden ornaments, clothes, woven baskets, the lot. It's open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day except Sunday, because Sunday, as the Sabbath, is taken extremely seriously here. You don't even go for a run or swim in the sea on a Sunday. Of course, as the capital city, it is also home to the royal family, and so you can go and visit the white-walled, red-roofed royal palace in the city centre. The Victorian, almost colonial-style architecture serves as a reminder not of any colonial history here, but the birth of a British-inspired monarchy in the mid-19th century. In keeping with the royal theme and visible from the roadside, but not up close, are the royal tombs, where every monarch of modern-era Tonga is buried. And for a reminder of the importance of Christianity to society here, visit the Free Church of Tonga, which, despite having suffered irreparable damage from a cyclone some years ago, stands proud in an eerie sort of way, a massive monument to itself. For further context and to view a wide range of interesting treasures and artifacts, the Tongan National Museum in the Queen Salote Memorial Hall is the place to go, and there are knowledgeable guides there who are happy to walk you around the collection for no extra fee. Or, of course, you can hit the beach and head out for a swim or a snorkel in the sea. The best snorkeling tours take you out about 20 to 30 minutes, and they generally provide all of the required gear. And the best beaches are to the west of the city, with Ha'atafu Beach at the northwestern tip of the island offering a great swimming spot. Now, moving to Neiafu, a picturesque yet slightly ramshackle town known for its stunning deep-water harbour, the Port of Refuge. The sailing is one of the best in the entire region. Neiafu is the capital of the Vava'u group of islands, 61 islands that make up Tonga's adventure hub, dashed with coral gardens, gorgeous beaches, shipwrecks and sea caves. In the town centre, the second largest town in Tonga after Nuku'alofa, there's something of a frontier town vibe going on. There are some Chinese shops, a small chandler, there are some decent restaurants, a few of which have Wi-Fi. The Arc Gallery is a studio gallery and floating home of the self-taught local artist Sherry and her husband Larry, so if you're looking for a creative souvenir, a good place to go. And of course, there's a typical local market to enjoy perusing for all of the island's fresh produce, a lot of coconut, and other crafts. For the nature lover, Neiafu is home to Tonga's only botanical garden, the Neiafu Botanical Gardens. The gardens have been cultivated in one form or another on this 22-acre site since 1972, with the express wish that the beauty of the garden bring you peace and happiness. 3 different guided tours are available if you have a particular interest in birdwatching, Polynesian culture, or enjoying a relaxing walk through the grounds in the company of a native, and their Neiafu beachside restaurant and bar is a perfect spot for a fish and chips lunch before heading on. If you're renting a car or taxi for your time in town, you might want to head further afield to take in the power of the Mapua Avea, or Whistle of the Noble in English. This 4-mile stretch of ocean blowholes turn the Pacific Ocean into a sensational water spectacle, especially if the swells are strong and the winds are up. Then they really erupt with frantic powder-white plumes. If you're driving yourself there, head to the village of Huma and then look out to sea. Now, one of the main reasons Neiafu is so popular with yacht visitors, especially from July to October, is the high chance of seeing humpback whales here. Not only that, but the humpbacks like to shelter in these warm, safe, nutrient-rich waters to mate and give birth to their calves. So you may have the memorable experience of seeing a baby calf with its mother as they fatten up ahead of their big migration north. And don't just watch, listen. Whales are well known for being excellent singers, and their song is sort of hauntingly beautiful. What's even more remarkable is that their songs are social, and whales carry different tunes with them as they traverse these great oceans. Back on land, to the northwest of Neiafu, overlooking the town with its distinctive flat top, is Mount Talau. With a peak of just 131 meters, it makes for an achievable hike if you feel up for a rugged adventure. And if you're wondering why the mountain is shaped as it is, well, local legend has it that some mischievous spirits, known here as Tevolo, from Samoa, tried to steal the mountain. They were peeved to see Tonga's mountain towering higher than their own and blocking their view, so they decided to steal the top of Mount Talau in the dead of night, for Tevalo can only come out at night, and add the stolen peak to the top of their own mountain back in Samoa. The locals were in shock. They were in despair to see their fine mountain being stolen from under their noses. Well, over their noses, I suppose would be more accurate here. And appealed to their own Tevalo, Tafakula, to help. Tafakula, a true master of mischief, sped immediately to the eastern side of the island, where the sun would later rise. She lifted up her skirt, can you believe it, and exposed her brightly shining buttocks to the Samoan thieves. Well, fooled into thinking that Tafakula's derriere was indeed the rising sun, the Tevalo of Samoa fled, dropping the mountain top in their panic. The top of the mountain has remained flat ever since, and the previously dominating peak is now known as Lotuma, a small island southwest from where it was pinched. Tonga's society is set on the foundations of tradition, as in many ways are all of our lives. And we often think of traditions as customs and rules that are handed down to us by previous generations, a pre-written, preordained manual by which to navigate life. But Tongan society, especially the Tongan monarchy, highlights another approach to tradition, a more involved, more active approach. If tradition had been followed to the letter, Tonga's line of 38 Tu'i Tongas would more than likely have been succeeded by colonial control by Britain. If tradition had been followed to the letter, Tonga's second king would more than likely have been deposed by his own people, and the kingdom of Tonga would have been succeeded by a republic. If tradition had been followed to the letter, Tonga's third monarch and first queen would have been killed at the age of 9, and the country's warm connection with the West, with shared values of economic growth, mass education, and an appreciation of the arts, might not have been fostered in these distant islands. But Tongan monarchs each took their traditions and applied them to the situations that they faced, and in doing so, they've demonstrated the true strength of tradition. Traditions come into their own not in their existence, but in their adaptability to offer a guiding light in times of uncertainty and darkness. Instead of changing the situation to match the letter of an ancient tradition, Tongan monarchs extracted the lesson of the tradition and applied that to their challenges and their opportunities. They took the essence of their tradition rather than the practice, and with each subsequent decision infused with that essence, they've created an evolution of Tongan society that continues to thrive in the modern world. The only surviving Polynesian monarchy. The only Polynesian islands not to have an Independence Day. They don't need one. Independence from who? Interpreted pragmatically, sometimes creatively, Tonga's traditions are very much alive today, and following the examples of their kings and queens, everyday Tonga exists as a place where respect for each other, for their shared heritage, and collective hopes for the future exist in the very fabric of society.